All right, so first thing, it's 35 minutes, you got 40 questions. So mathematically, what's that mean? You got just about what? $35 40 questions. Somebody can do the simple math here, come on. Okay, maybe not. Just under a minute a question. You've got less than a minute to answer each question, okay? That's an important thing. What's a big component of the science? There's some reading. Sometimes it's passages. Sometimes it's graphs, charts, tables, things like that. So it's one of these tests. This is one that a lot of people do run out of time on. One, because it's the last test. Two, you're just gassed. You're done. You're over it. And then three, it's just a lot of information. So a lot of students run out of time. So this is going to be one I'm really going to talk to you. It's not like the math where you do 2 passes. This is one where you've got to understand how to time manage, and we're going to talk about how to do that with these notes, okay? First, you don't have to attempt every passage to get an above average score. And this is a big deal because, again, time seems to be the worst enemy on this particular test. So we're going to talk about how do you determine which passages to do. How do you know which ones you should spend time on, that sort of thing. Next, the 36 points is broken into 3 analytic categories. It's broken into 3 parts. The first one is called scientific reasoning. Okay, those are inference or generalization type questions. Typically, these are the most difficult. These are a little bit harder because they're not directly stated. Do y'all know what the word inference means? To infer. If you infer something, that means you're implying it, but you're not directly stating it. So 13 of your 36 points come from these type questions. These are typically a little more difficult to answer. The next ones are figure interpretations, reading charts, graphs, tables. These are direct. These are right in there. You just have to find them. Those are 12 points. And then finally, patterns, okay? Understanding the relationships, variations, the changes. People who are very good at analyzing data typically do pretty good with 2 and 3. So that's 23 of your 36 points. People who are good at inferring information, who read passages and understand things that are stated without being directly stated, typically do better with the first one. A lot of this test and how you score on it is determined by how good a reader you are, what side of the brain you are. If you're more mathematically oriented, then for this particular test, you are going to be stronger in figure interpretation and patterns. That's my strength. If you're a good reader, you're going to be stronger here in terms of the generalization, the inference, more passage type things. And again, this test will be broken up even more. So there are 3 passage types. The first one is called a data representation. So of the analytic categories, which one do you think data representation best falls under? Is it under scientific reasoning, figure interpretation, or patterns?
Figure interpretation.
That one is a figure interpretation. Very good. Now, not all the questions from it necessarily are that, but the majority of them or figure interpretation. So for me personally, this is one I do pretty well on. The next type is experiments. So experiments, typically, those follow under patterns because you're doing multiple experiments and you're seeing what the outcomes are. What are the patterns that are developing based on the experiment? And then finally, the last one is conflicting viewpoints. And that one's more scientific reasoning. For me personally, that's the one I struggle the most with because I'm not a very good reader. So one of the things that we will do with your particular diagnostic test is we're going to break it up into the passage types. As we break it up in those passage types, you're going to start identifying what passage type is my best. Whichever one is not your best, then that's probably going to be the one that you maybe don't attempt, or you just pick your letter of the day. Don't invest your time in it and run out of time at the end. And I'll show you how to quickly do that, identify those using your diagnostic test again. Okay, next, there are two question types. The first one is called a look it up or direct information. So typically, those fall under figure interpretation and a lot of times the patterns. Not always with patterns, but a lot of times. Those are ones that you can go and find specifically. Here's what the answer is. Typically, those are your easiest. And again, one of the things that we'll do this week is we'll talk about how do you look at a question and determine, is it a look it up question? The next type is called a generalization, okay? That's more of the scientific reasoning. Those are typically more difficult. Now, again, if you're a good reader, you might do very, very well with that. Now, one thing I will tell you in terms of the science test itself, this is a hard one to practice. It's very, very difficult. It's not like math where, oh, I need to practice these skills. I need to practice using the calculator. The thing with the science is identifying what is your best method approach to taking this test and then implementing that strategy throughout. The tests itself are going to change and they're going to vary. But practicing the approach is going to be your best method of improving the score for this particular test. I will go and tell you also, depending on what ACT test you take, your science can fluctuate in score because based on how it's broken up, sometimes your science may be higher, then the next time your science may be lower, based on how the science test itself is built. It's not like the math. Okay, the math is pretty much going to be evenly distributed with the different question types. The science, though, it's going to be based on the passage types, and how that's broken up can determine whether your score goes up or down. Why that's important is because some of you may take the ACT, and then the next time you take it, you get the same exact composite because your science test may be dropped, but you went up in something else, and you get real frustrated. You can't do that. The tests are designed that way. So one particular test might fit you in terms of the science, and then the next one may not fit you in terms of the reading, so your composite stays the same. That's why it's so important to know if your school that you apply to or whatever does super score, and you just need to retake one section of the test. Okay, strategies. What are we going to do? I'm going to slide this up a little bit too. First thing, you're going to spend about 5 minutes on each passage. About 5 minutes. That's not very much time. 5 minutes goes really, really quickly. Next, you got to spend less than a minute per question. Now, that can obviously vary a little bit based on your approach to the overall test. So if there's a particular passage type you just don't do very well on, you decide just to save it at the end and just pick your letter of the day, you might have a little extra time to invest in a question, but not much, not much. Okay, again, this is one of the tests that a lot of students run out of time on. Look for patterns, very important. Look for patterns as you go through. There are things called inverse variation, direct variation, okay? Know what that is. Direct would be as, like right now, if you're talking about weather, as the day goes on, what typically happens to the temperature? It goes up, okay? That's a direct variation, okay? That's a direct variation. An inverse variation would be just the opposite. As the day goes on, the temperature goes down. They're opposite. One goes up or increases, the other one goes down. That's an inverse variation. So look for patterns, things like that. Refer, don't remember. There is too much information in these passages for you to remember everything in it. So refer. That means go back and look. In fact, I encourage a lot of students, don't even read the whole passage. Go to the questions first and start trying to find them. That's not always true, but don't get bogged down with the technical terminology. They're going to give you some big words in this thing that mean absolutely nothing. This test is purposefully designed to get you off track. This test is designed to test one thing. Can you sort your way through all this extra garbage and identify exactly what the question is asking and what the answer is? That's what this question or this test is designed to do. It's not about, do you know biology, do you know chemistry? That's not what this test is. This test is designed to see if you can weed your way through, get rid of all the junk, and identify what's most important. And it's hard, okay? It is difficult. That's why if you go to buy a car, when you sign those contracts, they've got all that legal information in there, and most people are like, whatever, I'll just sign, because you just want to get out. But there's a lot of stuff in there that if you are smart enough, you can say, okay, you're charging me $1,000 for nothing. That's, okay, a radio knob. Why? Yeah, I'm not paying that. Take that off, okay? They design these things that way. That's what this test is. Can you read through it and say, hey, this is garbage. I don't need this. It's not easy, okay? It's not. All right. 4 steps. Okay, what are our 4 steps to go through and pick what our answer should be? First, find the direct answer. Is there something in the problem that says, or the question says, go here for this? Okay, table 1, column 2, okay, go right there. See if you can't find the answer. Next, POE, P-O-E, process of elimination. I don't know if Mr. Coker did he talk to you all about POE already with English? No? Okay. Process of elimination. A lot of times you can eliminate answer choices. There are particular questions that I will emphasize to you that you can almost always, okay, these are not going to be possible answers. They're not abundant on the test, but there are some. Identify those and be able to do that. And again, we'll use your diagnostic test to point these out. Next, go with your best guess. Okay, guesstimate. Sometimes it's just about what your gut tell you. A lot of these kind of questions are those inference or generalization questions. They're not directly stated. It's just what you feel like based on the information you know, this is what it should be. This is what my best guess would be. Go with it. And just like we said in the general strategies, if you go with that answer, don't change your answer unless you have a real valid reason to change it. Don't go back to it and just say, well, maybe that's not right. Well, what's your reasoning? Do you have a real reason, or are you just second guessing yourself? If it's your first guess, it's probably your odds are in your favor to guess with that one, okay? And then lastly, do your letter of the day. Now, letter of the day here is not like on the math. The math, we said, they're evenly distributed. So you can count them up, see how many of each you have, whichever one you have the least amount of, that's probably going to be your letter of the day. That is not always true with the science tests, okay? They're not necessarily evenly distributed. This particular test was not. Not to mention the fact you've got fewer questions, so it's harder to evenly distribute them, okay? 10, 10, 10, because in the science you got 4 choices too. So it'd be 10 of each choice. That's not always going to happen. So letter of the day, just pick one, go with it, and be okay with it. Okay, individual strategies. And this is what, as we go through the week, and as we go through these practices, you're going to have to identify for yourself, because everybody is different. Everybody is different. This is not like the math section where we have basically one general strategy and go through it. This is very much tailored to you individually. So strategy 1, do the passages in order from your best or easiest to your worst or the hardest one for you. Now I will go and tell you, this is my personal strategy since I've been teaching this class. So one of the things you have to do is you have to identify what is your best or easiest passage. What are your worst passages or hardest ones? Two, focused on the first couple of questions in each passage. The reason for that is progression equals difficulty. What that means is, for passage 1 might be a data rep passage. There might be 6 questions with it. Question 1 is typically easier than question 6. As you go through those questions, they're going to get progressively harder. So focus on the first ones. They're usually easier to find the answers to. When you get down to question 4, 5, 6, and you start having trouble and you start spending extra time, then you might need to go to one of your other strategies. Can I eliminate answers? Do I have a gut feeling about one? Or do I just need to go with my letter of the day? So really focus on those first ones. Try to get those right. Then, if conflicting viewpoints passages are your hardest, focus on the questions that specify one person or hypothesis. And this may not make a whole lot of sense to you right now until we start breaking down your diagnostic test. So for me personally, conflicting viewpoints is the hardest. And the reason that is because it's a lot of reading. And like I said, I'm not a good reader. So for this one, I find the questions that pinpoint just one particular person. So instead of having to read the whole thing, I only have to read about that one person. It makes it a little easier for me to find the answers. So this is one type of strategy for the science. Again, as this week goes on, you need to identify, is this how I need to do mine? Second strategy is this. Just go ahead and do the passages in sequential order. Go from passage 1 and work through. So don't skip over passages or anything of that nature. 2, maximize your time by reading the questions first. Personally, this is what I would do every time anyway. Even if I'm going from my easiest passage to my hardest, I try to save time by reading the question first. And then lastly, invest most of your time on the look it up questions. Okay, these are the ones that are going to tell you exactly where to go to find the answer. They're not the generalization or inference questions, so they're typically a lot easier to find. Questions?